Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. My name is Avi Melamed. I'm a co-founder of Inside the Middle East ITME Institute. This is yet another session of the briefing room by ITME. Today we are very honored to have a special guest, Dr. EYTAN Cohen, an expert on Turkey affairs. As always, I will start with some introduction of Dr. Cohen and then we'll move to our session, reminding you my conversation with Dr. Cohen is about 40 minutes, followed by your questions. Please insert your questions, pose your questions in the question box at the bottom of the screen that you see in front of you, and let us move to our session. But first, I would like, of course, to introduce Dr. EYTAN Cohen Yanarocak, born and raised in Turkey, is a Turkey expert on the Moshe Dayan Center for Middle Eastern African Studies, MDC, at Tel Aviv University, and the Jerusalem Institute for Strategy and Security, JISS. Dr. Cohen received his PhD from Tel Aviv University Schools of History and is lectured there as well as Shalem Academic College. Dr. Cohen is the editor of Turkey Scholar, Insight on Turkish Affairs. In May 2015, he was awarded the then David Prize Scholarship in the category of Past, Retrieving the Past Historians and Their Sources. He is the author of The Evolution of the Turkish School Textbooks from Atatürk to Erdogan, published by Lexington Books, Rowman and Lugerfield in September 2022. Dr. Hai, thank you for participating. Welcome to ITME Briefing Room about Turkey.
Dear Avi, thank you very much for having me on this distinguished platform. It's a privilege for me, and good evening to all of the attendees.
Thank you very much. Turkey is always an intriguing place, and it seems like constantly being, for one reason or another, in the center of the media attention and headlines. Obviously, in the last couple of weeks, with all the rhetoric coming out from Turkey, the story of NATO summit and other dramatic things affiliated with that, I would like to start with something that I have the feeling was some kind of was going under the radar, but I think it's very significant. And this is, politically speaking, looking at what's going on right now in Turkey, domestically. If I understood correctly, there are some interesting, I would say, process/developments that is going on in Turkey. Could you please enlighten us on that issue?
Sure. First of all, I would like to use a new concept that is widely used to define the conditions, for instance, in Turkey. It says illiberal democracy. In 2023, the Turkish people went to the ballot boxes, and after the 2 rounds of elections, they did elect Recep Tayyip Erdogan, and in the first round he received 49%, and the second round, since he did not acquire the majority, then he had no choice but to run another elections, and there he received 52% of the total votes. In retrospect, we can say that he really enjoyed the results of the second elections, because obviously it crowned him as a legitimate democratic leader of Turkey. In other words, if we're going to compare it with the Egyptian or any other Muslim Middle Eastern country, well, he did not receive 99% of the votes, but really he had a hard time, and he received in the first round 49% and in the second round 52%. So he really relied on this legitimacy. But what happened afterwards was a completely another story. Since he witnessed a defeat in the municipal elections, so he came to the conclusion that given the deterioration of the Turkish lira and of course the Turkish economy, unemployment rates, etc., he began to come to a conclusion that the opposition really constitutes a real threat for his rule. And as a result, he looked at the most important opponent of his, which was Mayor of Istanbul, Ekrem İmamoğlu. I'm speaking in past tense. I said was, and it was an intentional usage, by the way, because in March 2025, we have witnessed something unprecedented. Ekrem İmamoğlu was taken into custody. He was accused that he arranged a fake BA diploma, which is considered as the most important condition for being elected as Turkish president. And secondly, later he was accused for being a crime leader. And if it's not sufficient for you, he was also accused for being a spy for the United Kingdom. So, long story short, the most important opponent of Erdogan, who could really challenge him, is behind the bars today. And until that day, sincerely, I believe that I never thought that Turkey was a Scandinavian democracy, right? But I really thought that once in 4 years, once in 5 years, later they changed it. The Turkish people had a chance to get rid of the running government through the ballot box. That was the consensus. That was what the people really believed in. However, after the arrest of Ekrem İmamoğlu and the charges against him, and later, recently in May 2026, another unprecedented event took place in the Turkish political history. This time, the Turkish judiciary, which is under very strong influence of Mr. Erdogan, took a very historical decision when they canceled the results of the primaries, of the internal elections of the people of the Republican People's Party. And as a result, once they canceled the election results within the party, then they sent the ex-leader of the political party, who was considered as a consecutive loser against Erdogan. He is Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu. He was once again crowned as the head of the party. And the current leader of the party, Özgür Özel, had no choice, but he had to leave the headquarters of the parliament due to the police raid. Yes, you heard right, police raid. So now, when we are looking at the Turkish domestic politics, and especially to the Republican People's Party, we are seeing a fragmented, a divided opposition. Those who are favoring the ex-head Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu, and those who are in favor of the current leader Özgür Özel. Obviously, Özgür Özel also is on the side of Ekrem İmamoğlu, and he was paving the way of Mayor of Istanbul for the presidency. So today, what we see is something a very important deterioration for the Turkish democracy, because Erdogan is conducting here a preemptive strike. What do I mean by preemptive strike? Instead of running in the ballot box and trying to defeat his opponent there in a democratic manner, so he's changing the rules of the game. Yes, most probably in May 2028, we will have elections in Turkey. But these elections will not be as fair as 2023 elections. And by the way, I'm opening here a parenthesis. Also, 2023 elections were not that fair because Erdogan also exploited Turkish state's apparatus and infrastructure to make his own propaganda. So also during the propaganda process, we could not speak about an equality between the Turkish opposition and the Turkish government. But you know what? In terms of Turkey, maybe this was the normal. But now what we are seeing is something really incredible. And when Mr. Erdogan is looking at his most natural critiques, like the Europeans, like the United States, so he's also enjoying from an unprecedented silence over there again. And in a nutshell, because I do not want to get lost in the Turkish foreign policy yet, because I assume that you will going to ask me questions about that issue as well. Regarding the Europeans and the silence of the Europeans and the Americans, well, I will, in a nutshell, answer this like this. The Europeans are very much deterred because of the Russian bear, and they do not want to see Turkey as an additional headache in their eastern flank. Okay, we all know that Turkey, in the eyes of the European Union, is considered as an occupier state in northern Cyprus, and it has chronic disagreements with Greece in Eastern Mediterranean as far as the maritime delimitation concepts are concerned. And therefore, we may thought that maybe the Europeans could criticize Turkey on the basis of democracy, but make no mistake, they are not doing it. Why? Because of the Russian bear, because they need the Turkish defense industry so badly. They need the Turkish UAVs so badly. They are turning a blind eye on that issue. And when it comes to the United States, well, we all know that the Trump administration is not prioritizing the democratic values over immediate national interests. And given Turkey's increasing and deepening national interests in Syria, well, we can definitely say that Mr. Erdogan is providing Mr. Trump whatever he needs: the Syrian oil, the profit margins for reconstruction of Syria, and obviously political penetration in Syria. Let us not forget, Syria after the First World War was ruled by the French. Later, it was under the Soviet influence, and then Russian influence, and then the Iranian influence. It means that the United States of America never penetrated into Syria, and for the first time ever, thanks to Erdogan, so Donald Trump is able to penetrate into Syrian territory, also by means of economy and political influence. So when you're looking at this picture, for Erdogan, all the stars are aligned. When there is no criticism from Europe, when there is no criticism from US, and when you already acquired the control of your state apparatuses and you eliminated all of your checks and balances, well, it's a one-man show. It's a one-man show.
Yes, definitely. I mean, as you said it very correctly, all the stars are lining in one line for Erdogan. And you very accurately described this both inner and external picture. And that inevitably leads us to the next thing. And this is, of course, this dramatic war that is going on in the Middle East, United States versus Iran. We are all familiar with everything that happened. Iran is one of the giants of the region. Turkey is one of the giants of the region. Turkey and Iran has a very interesting history, a complex relationship of both animosity/friendship for different reasons. We won't go into that. But my question regarding that is how the war between the United States and Iran that Israel was part of, how that war impacts Turkey from a geostrategic perspective.
Well, from a Turkish point of view, they do not want to see the topple of the regime in Iran. First of all, let's analyze what are the core reasons for that. And we obviously know that if the Iranian regime would be toppled, it would be most probably replaced by a very pro-Western friendly entity like, for instance, Reza Pahlavi or any other actor that may cooperate with the West. I know that it is hilarious to see the name of Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, but still, We all fascinated by his name, but at the end, we saw the core reason for it was his collaboration with the West. It means that if the Iranian regime would collapse, Turkey's monopoly since 1979, in Islamic Revolution, well, it will disappear. Turkey will no longer be the only country in the region which would be considered as the West's ally, but rather the new Iranian administration would also be function as such. And therefore, first and foremost, Turkey would like to see its monopoly in terms of geostrategic position. Secondly, they do not want to see any kind of friendly relations between the state of Israel and the new Iranian administration. After October the 7th, unfortunately, the Turkish administration labeled Israel as Turkey's first and foremost national security threat. And therefore, in case of a regime change in Iran, well, Israel will be able to allocate its resources to other areas. So Turkey wants to see Israel busy with Iran. Okay, they want to keep Israel busy with Iran.
Yeah.
This is the second important reason why they favor the regime. The third important issue is the refugee influx. Now, let's imagine together, in case of a regime change, most probably the regime supporters would be chased by the new administration. And most probably they would be hanged, or they would be tried, or they would be arrested, right? It would be a kind of a revenge time. So therefore, most probably, in case of a regime change, we may expect a new refugee influx into Turkey. And the Turkish administration, which suffered from an enormous criticism at home due to the Syrian civil war. During the Syrian civil war, approximately, roughly speaking, like 4 million Syrian refugees came to Turkey, and they created lots of sociological problems like xenophobia, like unemployment, etc. So they already drew the necessary conclusions from this important lesson, and therefore, according to Bloomberg, a leakage that appeared on Bloomberg, the Turkish administration already made necessary plans to launch an extraterritorial occupation in the Iranian territory, okay, to stop the potential refugees there, to have a buffer zone there, okay? So we understand that it is a real headache for the Turkish side. Besides that, we also see that the Turks do not want to see any kind of improvement of the Kurdish political rights. Okay, in Iran, there is a very high, there is a very large minority of the Kurds. They reside in Western Iran, or in Iranian, or in Kurdish terminology, it is labeled as Eastern Kurdistan. This particular land, Eastern Kurdistan, was the home for the Republic of Mahabad, which was considered as the only independent Kurdish state that survived for a year. And therefore, this is not an ordinary Kurdish canton, but this particular Kurdish canton could export Kurdish nationalism to other segments of this geographical land called Kurdistan. In this case, also Southeast Turkey, Eastern Turkey can be a victim of this kind of export of Kurdish nationalism. So, given the fact that today in Turkey we have a new so-called peace process with the Kurdish movement, so they do not want to disturb this with something out of the box, trend that may disturb the immediate Turkish political gains inside Turkey. And therefore, they also would like to keep the regime it's not because the Turks like the regime. It's pure realpolitik, in my opinion. Historically speaking, if we were talking about the 1990s secular Turkey, I assume that the secular Turkey would really want to see the collapse of Iranian regime. But unfortunately, today we are not speaking about the same kind of a foreign policy approach. That it's not the same perception, and therefore we do see that the current Turkish administration favors the Ayatollah regime, and they try to also mend the fences between the United States and Tehran, so that this current regime would be able to continue to attract the attention of the West and Israel, and will keep them busy. So this is the most important, in my opinion. Of course, you may disagree, but this is the most important drive for the Turkish foreign policy. And also, they do not want to challenge Iran in a direct manner. The border between Iran and Turkey was drawn in 1639 Zuhab Treaty, it is also known in Turkish as Kasr-ı Şirin Treaty. So the Turks really do not want to see any kind of a border change. They do not want to see any kind of a new status quo change. And therefore, again, according to the latest leakages in the Israeli and the international press, we can understand that the Turkish administration opposed to the Kurdish ground invasion from Iraq to Iran, especially for this reason, because they do not want to see any kind of a change here.
Yes, definitely. I mean, it was one of the most surprising thing was, again, referring to the reports leaking about allegedly some plan to deploy the Kurdish underground as a military power that will operate on the ground. My first initiative in reaction was, it sounds to me totally crazy, given the fact that obviously the Turks would not sit on the sideline and see something like that happening, because the meaning of that is that it is going to further fuel sentiment of Kurdish independence, which is something that Turkey has been fighting robustly, I would say, against all those years. So to conclude this part about the war in Turkey, we understand very clearly from your presentation why Turkey didn't want to see the downfall of the regime. Would it be accurate to say that all in all, when Turkey looks at the current situation right now, as we are right now, which, by the way, there are speculations or assessment that we may witness shortly the full-scale resume of the war, would you say that Turkey, roughly speaking, benefit the weakening of the Mullah regime?
From weakening, yes. From its weakening, it is profiting. Okay, it's a huge Turkey's interest, because at the end of the day, when we are looking at this large picture of the Middle East, as you also mentioned during the introduction part of this session, you also said that Turkey is a very important player, and also Iran is considered as a very important player. Look, these states are not artificial states like Syria, like Iraq. They were not invented in an artificial manner. These states are considered as the successor states of imperial glorious empires. Okay, so therefore their rivalry is real, and I must admit that their memory, their state's memory, is very long. It's not a short-sighted, policy making. When the decision makers in Ankara, when they are designing their foreign policy vis-a-vis Iran, they are not judging the Iranians as if there is a new government that was born in 1979, but they are seeing it as a consecutive chain of a larger entity.
Yeah.
Okay, and they believe that this current regime, may be toppled in the future. It may continue but Iranian people will remain there. So from their perspective, if Turkey would collaborate with a non-Muslim entity like Israel or the United States of America, um, it would be considered as a huge minus in the history of the relations. Yes, there is a sectarian problem between Sunni Turkey versus Shiite Iran. That's a very well-known story since the days of Sultan Yavuz Selim I, Selim the Ferocious versus Shah Ismail, who was defeated by the Ottomans. And therefore, if we are speaking about the domination of Sunni Islam in the Middle East, well, it is because of the War of Chaldiran of 1514. Okay, so the history is not detached from today's Turkish foreign policy or from the Iranian foreign policy. It is there. The history is with us. That's why people who really want to understand history, they are coming to the departments of Middle Eastern history departments at the universities, because unless you understand the history of the Middle East, well, you will not be able to understand the core reasons of Turkey's actions in the Middle East, because they are very much influenced by Turkey's past. Okay, if you will not be, if you're not going to focus on the history of the Jewish people and the special bond of the Jewish people with their ancestral land, and if you will not understand the meaning of Zionism, which is the Jewish nationalism and the right self-determination of the Jewish people in their ancestral land, so you will not be able to understand the Israeli decision-making process. So once we are looking at the history, we should never underestimate the historical background, the religious background, the ethnic background of the actors in the Middle East. And when it comes to Turkey and Iran, well, they are considered as senior actors. They must be respected. Yes, you may hate the Iranian regime, but you should respect the Iranian civilization. And once you respect your enemy, then you will be much more successful, believe me.
Dr. Ha, it's very interesting what you said about the history, understanding the history. In our work in ITME, one of our slogans is that in the Middle East, history is the present. And we are always saying, if you want to understand the Middle East today, you must understand the story and the history of the Middle East, because it's still kicking in, as we say. And actually, that leads us to the concluding part of our conversation. We got some 10 minutes left. Talking about Turkey and Israel. The bottom line, from an Israeli perspective, Turkey is definitely a growing source of concern. We just had a very, very extreme rhetoric by Turkish leaders, bordering some genocidal calls against Israel, I would say. We are familiar with the fact that Turkey is clearly increasing influence in arenas that are bordering Israel, namely Syria, Lebanon, Gaza Strip. Erdogan has been repeatedly carrying out a very vicious, I would say sometimes, anti-Israel rhetoric and campaign. So in Israel, there is a big concern. Are we looking at Turkey as the upcoming major threat as far as the state of Israel is concerned? Or are we looking at something that is more tactical, it is subject to changes? What are we looking at?
Well, I must admit that I really hate this question, but I cannot blame you that you're asking this question. I hate this question because I was born and raised in Turkey, and I really love Turkey. But as a Jew and an Israeli researcher, I have to answer this question, and I think that this is a kind of a curse. So, if I have to answer this question, whether Turkey is becoming or evolving into Israel's next arch enemy, my core problem is I cannot tell you, no, it's not happening. Okay, when I'm looking at the rhetoric of the Turkish decision makers like President Erdogan or Foreign Minister Fidan, and their also concrete actions in the Middle East, I feel very much concerned because at the end, this is, their unilateral unilateral steps are causing friction between Israel and Turkey. What they are doing, let me summarize it for you. Apart from launching a delegitimization campaign, a very systematic delegitimization campaign against Israel, that they are giving many different nicknames to the Israeli prime minister, also to the state of Israel, and they do their best in order to conduct defamation against the Jewish state. This is the first thing. I think this is very problematic. They do impose judicial sanctions by collaborating with South Africa. They are also imposing their own judicial sanctions by issuing arrest warrants against the Israeli prime minister and other senior leaders, including the chief of staff. Why I'm putting my emphasis on the Israeli chief of staff? Because the chief of staff of the state of Israel, the IDF, he is above politics. It means that in case of a government change, this decision will stay there. And the Turkish government is also closing the door for mending the fences with Jerusalem even after the elections. That is the bottom line of this decision against the Israeli chief of staff. It is not limited with the current government. Okay, this is very important. Besides that, we are seeing that Turkey, unfortunately, is also adopting a very problematic strategy when it is coming to encirclement of Israel. Last year, they launched a new initiative called the Neighbors of Syria. This initiative is composed of the countries who have a border with Syria, obviously, as we can understand from the name. These are Iraq, Turkey, Syria, Lebanon, and Jordan. And once they were asked why are they launching this entity, of course, they told the press that there is an ongoing ISIS challenge in the Middle East. So in order to get rid of ISIS, so these countries came together and formed an operational headquarters. But when we are looking at the statements of the foreign ministers of the same entity, we also see a very important statement that they do not want to see any kind of external external penetration in the Middle East, any kind of external intervention. This is without giving the name of the United States. They are trying to indicate and highlight they do not want to see any kind of extraterritorial intervention from the US or any other superpower. So why is it important for us? Because when we are looking at the map, we are seeing that Lebanon, Syria, and Jordan, they have borders with Israel. And it's not, we cannot stop it there. Recently, approximately 2 weeks ago, the Turks, this time in Cairo, launched an additional initiative called R4, from the letter R of the word regional four. Okay, the regional four. Who are these actors? Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, Turkey, and Egypt. In other words, the siege against Israel that started with Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, and now you also added Egypt into this alliance, okay, circle. So you have a Turkish crescent from the north to the east to the south. And of course, you may say, but you also have the west, the Mediterranean Sea. And then I will remind you the existence of the most important and of the strongest navy in the Eastern Mediterranean called the Turkish Navy. And obviously, this will close the crescent also from the west. Okay? Of course, Israel also has its own abilities. It is not going to stand aside, and it will obviously would know to defend itself. We are aware of it. We are not naive. But given this policy of surrounding Israel with legitimate state actors, and this is where Turkey is becoming much more complex when you compare it with Iran, for instance, because in the Israeli media, we hear some comparisons between Iran and Turkey. Well, let me tell you, Turkey is much more complex than Iran. Turkey is much more clever than Iran because while they are challenging the state of Israel, they also preserve their legitimacy. For instance, from an Israeli point of view, when you are challenging in Iran, when you are challenging the Iranian regime, it's not hard for you to persuade the Western circles when it comes to freedom of speech, democracy, human rights. And you can indicate many different differences between the Western civilization and the Iranian regime. But when it comes to Turkey, well, this is an illiberal democracy, and their leader is engaging in a very strong and intimate bromance with Donald Trump. So many critiques of Israel, when they are seeing the Israeli decision makers indicating Turkey as a kind of a new challenge for the national security of the state of Israel, well, they always highlight that Turkey is a NATO member. Turkey is a friend of Donald Trump. But, Donald Trump, after 2 years, will go. Okay? So what will happen if, let's imagine, may God forbid, yes, I'm expressing my own personal idea here, may God forbid, if a kind of a person like Bernie Sanders would come to the White House, what will happen? It's a huge question mark that Israel should ask itself whether the US will be able to act as a buffer between Israel and Turkey. The Americans are not giving importance to the verge. As long as these statements will remain as verge, from the American perspective, they are looking at the bottom line. Israel and Turkey, are they fighting? No, but they are, making harsh statements against each other. That's for domestic purposes. No, these domestic statements are poisoning people-to-people relations. And once you do not have direct flights between the two countries, once you have this unilateral economic sanctions against the state of Israel, well, let me tell you, it is very easy to find ourselves in a war because we do not have anything to lose in our hands. Okay, so this is the core problem. This is the core problem.
So,
if I may add one more sentence regarding the reason why the Turks are not cutting the relations. Let me tell you, Avi, it's not because of their love for Zionism, or they are not Zionists.
Right.
They continue to keep their relationship with Israel in order to have an access to Jerusalem, in order to have an access to the Palestinian Authority, which is located in Judea and Samaria. Because once you will going to declare hostilities against the state of Israel, well, obviously, you will lose all of your contacts and all of your penetration abilities in these locations. So since these are landlocked or Israeli locked territories that in order to get there, you have to pass from an Israeli checkpoint, a border, or from the Israeli territory, they cannot sacrifice this very important thing for them, only for Jerusalem and Palestinian Authority, and also to provide so-called humanitarian aid to Gaza Strip. So I'll stop here.
We could have continued this discussion for hours. There are so many fascinating aspects that you bring into the picture. I think that we could sum up, at least in the context of Turkey and Israel, that we definitely have to look very closely to see how the Turkish inner policy and inner politics and regional politics, how they will merge and impact the policy of Turkey vis-a-vis Israel. So I would say that definitely looking at the title of our session, It's a big question mark. Are we looking at Turkey that is going to become yet a major challenge to Israel, or maybe not? I don't understand totally the dilemma that you have expressed. At this point, with your permission, as we are concluding our first part of the conversation, I would like to turn to my colleague, Mr. Josh Goldberg, the Educational Director of ITME. Josh will lead the part of the Q&A. Josh, please join us.
Thank you so much, Avi, Dr. Chai. What a fascinating discussion. It's truly an honor to be part. Dear listeners, we have a fellowship known as Voices from the Middle East about the Middle East. We are currently in the heart of recruitment season. Please join us. Join our renowned educator and Middle East intelligence analyst, Avi Melamed, and regional experts like Dr. Cohen Yanarocak to gain the knowledge, the skills, and the tools to become ambassadors of change. We're looking for students and young leaders between 18 and 30 years old, high-achieving individuals who are looking to bridge divides with an interest in the region, the history of the region, and impacting today and tomorrow. Our fellowship spans between October of 2026 through April 2027, with Sunday Zoom sessions, weekly assignments and projects culminating in a capstone weekend to bring everyone together. If you know folks that you think would be a good fit for our fellowship, please refer them. You can scan the code on your screen here on the bottom right. You can refer them to our website, insidethemiddleeast.com, for more information. At this point, I would like to turn to some of the questions from our Q&A. We have a number of questions, some of the questions which I think have been answered. So I'm going to ask specific ones. And our first one comes from Jeff Grant. Iran's revolutionary ideology is explicitly religious and transnational. Turkey's governing ideology appears to combine Sunni Islamism with Turkish nationalism and state interests. Which of those ultimately takes precedence when they conflict?
When they
conflict.
Mm-hmm. That's a great question. First of all, look, I'm not an expert on Iran, but we can definitely say that the Iranian Islamic regime also tried to constitute as an example for the other Muslim countries, and they tried to export their own model for the Sunni states as well. For instance, I would like to give you a very concrete example. In Turkey, the book of Ali Shariati, who was known as a very important Iranian ideologue, he penned the book, I Came Here to Disturb You. That was the name of the book. And that particular book was translated into Turkish, and it became a kind of a bestseller among the Turkish Sunni Islamists, okay? It means that they do not necessarily have to be converted into Shiite Islam, but they could copy and paste the good sides of the Iranian model for their own political views. Okay, this is the first issue. And when it comes to the Turkish Islamism, let me say, I would like to give you another important example. During the 1960s, 1970s, there was a very important publication house in southeastern Turkey, in the province of Malatya, called Hilal. Hilal means the crescent. The most important objective of this publication house, they took the books of the Muslim Brotherhood leaders like Hassan al-Banna, Said Qutb, and others. They translated them into Turkish, and they made it accessible for the Islamist intellectuals. And these people were very much influenced from these ideas. And when we are looking at the Turkish Islamists of today, well, we can talk about a mixture of the ideas of Muslim Brotherhood ideologies, the Islamist the Islamist, how should I say, the identification, like being a part of a greater Islamic ummah, this sense of being a pan-Islamism. Yes, this is the word, pan-Islamism. They also imported pan-Islamism also from the Iranian Islamic Revolution. And obviously, they also took their Ottoman kind of pan-Islamism, which was introduced by Abdülhamid II, and the idea of Ittihad Islam, which is the unity of Islam. Okay, and when you inject in it also neo-Ottomanism, which is the ideology that seeks to revive the influence of the Turks within the ex-territories of the Ottoman Empire. So then you have this current leadership of Erdogan that they would like to find a common denominator with the Arab Street in entire Middle East, and this is also paving the way for a friction between Iran and Turkey. Look, in my short discussion, I made a very important historical reference to Battle of Chaldiran, which was between the Selim the Ferocious and Shah Ismail. After defeating Shah Ismail in eastern Anatolia, Selim the Ferocious conducted Sunnification for the entire Anatolia, and he killed dozens of Alevi red-headed infidels. And later he continued to his conquest in Syrian territory. Okay, in 1516, there he managed to conquer Syria, land of Israel, Jordan, all this area from the Mamluks. And a year later, in 1517, he also conquered the city of Cairo and acquired the caliphate. And for the first time, acquired this title for the name of the entire Turkish nation. So the answer to your question lies in history. The Turks already, in my opinion, had the upper hand. And once Bashar al-Assad fell and al-Julani, together with Tayyip Erdogan, filled that vacuum, well, let me tell you, the Ottomans are back to the same area that they ruled for 402 years. Because, as I mentioned, from 1516 until 1918, these people controlled this region. They do not see themselves as outsiders, and they think that the Middle East is returning to its factory settings. Okay, so the Iranians are back in their own territory. Okay, they would be deterred. So from their perspective, who is challenging this neo-Ottoman / pan-Islamic rule? Its name is the State of Israel, and we are here to stay. It's incredible, but this is the case. So I really hope that I could answer your question.
Thank you so much, Dr. Chai. There's another question from Norman that asks, can you continue to illuminate the situation of this conflict between Israel and neo-Ottomanism in Turkey with regard to Gaza? Can you illuminate how Gaza plays into the puzzle?
Sure. As I already mentioned, Selim the Ferocious, when he acquired the control of, when he conquered all of this land, obviously he turned this land as a part of his empire, and from an Islamic point of view, this particular land was recognized as Darul Islam, the house of Islam. Okay, it is a Muslim territory. And once the Ottomans were defeated in the First World War, this land was captured by the British. And later, the British divided this land, the UN partition plan between the Jews and the Arabs. And the rest is history. We had Israel's War of Independence because the Arabs refused to acknowledge the the decision of the United Nations. Long story short, this particular land was, if you like to say, conquered, if you like to say, taken over by the Jewish state of Israel. From the Turkish point of view of Turkish Islamists, I'm not talking about the traditional Turkish policy which recognized the state of Israel in 1949, okay? So this is creating a kind of a headache, okay? And of course, Gaza is a continuous victimhood. It's a kind of a screensaver that it is coming there once again, every 4 months, every year. And unfortunately, after October the 7th, because of the Hamas brutality against the state of Israel and its citizens here, we happen to find ourselves in a total war this time. This current skirmish is not a limited operation, but instead we would like to see this time a radical change, because Hamas, we underestimated Hamas, and it is definitely constituting a very strategic threat against the state of Israel. So how Turkey gets into here? Turkey is using its humanitarian aid / victimhood card, and it is using Gaza to delegitimize the state of Israel and to keep Israel busy. Okay, this is the name of the game. If you look at Hakan Fidan's interview in the Turkish TV, he was asked a question, a copy-paste question regarding the Kurdish insurgency and the Palestinian insurgency. Okay? While he legitimized the Palestinian armed movement, he said that Turkey should do everything possible to tackle the Kurdish armed PKKs. But you could also have, the other way, or, you should, or black or white. You have to be consistent, right? But when it comes to Israel, unfortunately, this double standard policy kept continue, and their, in my opinion, most important agenda. I don't think that the Turkish administration thinks about the Palestinian civilians or their current situation. I think that they want to keep this problem alive, so they would keep Israel busy, and they could weaken Israel, and they could delegitimize Israel, and they can also consolidate their own constituency at home. Of course, you may disagree with me, and I totally respect your opinion, but this is how I see the things.
Thank you so much, Dr.
I think it's very valid. I mean, it's very clear that the Palestinian has been clearly a pawn that Erdogan has been playing very effectively, I would say. Josh, sorry.
Dr. Chai, I want to ask a final question. This one is coming from Joe. And at the same time, Joe, and for those interested in the inner workings and inner politics of Türkiye, Dr. Chai penned a very important book entitled "The Evolution of Turkish School Textbooks from Atatürk to Erdogan." That I think there's a lot in the depth of Türkiye, the history of Türkiye, and how it plays to today's neo-Ottomanism that is incredibly important. So, famous question, Dr. Chai. What does a post-Erdogan Türkiye look like in your eyes?
That's a very tough question once again. I penned this book here. It was my PhD dissertation. And later I added an additional chapter regarding the Turkish school textbooks that were published under Erdogan. And I can definitely indicate and highlight the most striking differences between the two periods. Islam, especially political Islam, is very much emphasized. Jihad, especially after the failed coup attempt, which was marked, on July 15th, it was the 10th year. Okay, So in the school textbooks that were introduced right after the July 15th failed coup attempt, we began to see, the concept of jihad was introduced to the students as a positive, uh, as a positive concept. Unfortunately, the books adopt a very pro-Palestinian, a very non-balanced narration when it comes to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Zionism and the Jews are kind of demonized, especially Zionism is demonized, and the Jews are portrayed as an external entity who do not belong to the Middle East. But there is also a paradox when the international relations or the Turkish contemporary history textbooks regarding as Jews as outsiders, when you're opening the religious studies textbooks of the same ministry, you will see that there is a part, for instance, about Jerusalem and Judaism, etc. Of course, Judaism or the Holy Bible, the Old Testament, is labeled as a falsified book that no one should believe in it. But still, there are some contradictions between, between some school textbooks. You can see it. In case of United States of America and the case of terrorism, well, the terrorists of 1911 were portrayed in a way that their acts could be tolerated. Okay, like there was a whitewashing of the words to justify the act. Okay, so the Americans were not 100% innocent, for instance. Of course, it was condemned as a terrorist act. But yet, it is also opening here a window for the student so that he could be skeptical regarding the U.S. position. So we cannot definitely say that it's a unilateral or a very firm pro-Western allied school textbook. Okay, so this is a very important challenge. When it comes to biology, we could not speak about Darwin's theory of evolution, but instead we are talking about theological explanations. So we have many different examples that we can give more and more, and obviously anti-Armenian content, anti-Greek content is also there. And these are problematic. And let me tell you, some of these content also appeared in the pre-Erdogan school textbooks, and take in account that the Turkey that brought Erdogan to power was much more moderate. I mean, its school textbooks were much more moderate when you compare with the current school textbooks. Okay, so now you also see in the current school textbooks also the narration, the pro-secular narration of the War of Independence is deteriorated. It is much more religionized in many ways. Mm-hmm. So, in my opinion, within 20 years, we will have a much more conservative Turkish society. And when we are looking at the birth rates of the secular peoples and the conservative people, you will see the difference. While the secular people are bringing to the world only one or at most two children, the conservative circles tend to bring more. Okay, but according to the latest census reports, we are seeing that there is an unprecedented decrease in the birth rates of Turkey. For the first time ever, it dropped under 2. It means that in case that this trend will not be stopped, most likely in the very near future, Turkey's population most probably would be dropped by millions of people, and therefore the Turkish administration is looking to import some other Turkic elements from other states, like from Russia, like from Balkans, to pave their way to Turkey so that the number of the population will not be dropped. Obviously, it is because of the deteriorating Turkish economy.
Thank you so much. That's a lot to talk about. Avi Melamed, our ITME founder and vision. Thank you so much for your time. Dr. EYTAN Cohen Yanarocak, your wisdom, as always, is enlightening, enriching, and gives us a lot to think about.
Thank you very much for your kind words. And let me seize this opportunity, and I would like to thank Avi once again for this distinguished platform. I'm not taking it for granted. And thank you very much for all the people who came here. Tonight we have a World Cup final, but you chose ITME instead of a World Cup, right? So, thank you once again. I know that the game did not start, so I'm exaggerating a little. I'm enjoying myself. So thank you once again for having me, and I wish you all the best.
Thank you, Dr. Chai.
Thank you, kindly.
Thank you.
I'd like to conclude today. If you like what you've seen from inside the Middle East, please visit our website. Attend the next session of the briefing room from the region about the region. Our next episode is August 9th. With all the developments currently happening in the Middle East, we're kind of waiting to see where things go a little bit before we book our next guest. But put it on your calendars, Sunday, August 9th. This podcast is made possible by supporters and viewers like you. ITME is an independent, non-profit institute committed to apolitical, intelligence-based Middle East education. Visit our website, Inside the Middle East, or scan this QR code to support our work and donate. Thank you kindly, and have a wonderful day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.